June 1941, Lwów. The German war machine launches its massive invasion of the Soviet Union. Cities fall within days. Entire regions collapse under the weight of the Wehrmacht's advance. And behind the front lines, following closely in the shadow of the combat troops, come the Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing units tasked not with holding territory, but with annihilating it. Their targets: entire groups of people deemed enemies of the Third Reich. In the borderlands between eastern Poland and western Ukraine, territories seized by the Soviets in 1939, the German occupation transforms the landscape almost instantly. Local communities, already brutalized by nearly 2 years of Soviet repression, now face a new wave of terror. And for the intellectuals of Lwów, that terror is about to become personal. To the Nazi leadership, this region is not simply a military front. It is something far more calculated. A laboratory for racial warfare. Cities like Lwów, with their universities, their libraries, their deep intellectual traditions, are seen as breeding grounds for future resistance. And so, even before the front lines stabilize, the SS and Gestapo begin compiling lists. Names, addresses, targets for elimination. Among those marked for death are the professors of Lwów, scholars, doctors, mathematicians, writers, men who embodied the intellectual heritage of pre-war Poland. Men the occupiers see as obstacles to their long-term domination. By early July 1941, only days after the German capture of the city, the machinery of extermination is already in motion. Arrests begin at night. And by the end, 27 university professors and lecturers will be murdered, along with their loved ones. But this story does not end in silence. The perpetrators of these atrocities would eventually face justice, and some would pay for their crimes with their own lives. Lwów, known today as Lviv, Ukraine. Before the war, it was a jewel of Polish culture, a city of learning, books, music, and conversation. In 1939, its population exceeded 300,000. Among them were scholars, artists, scientists, and writers. The city boasted 5 universities and academies, including the prestigious Jan Kazimierz University and the Lwów Polytechnic, institutions that had produced some of Poland's brightest minds. Professors of mathematics, medicine, law, and philosophy lectured in grand halls filled with eager students. The Lwów School of Mathematics was spoken of with pride across Europe. Names like Stefan Banach, Hugo Steinhaus, and Antoni Łomnicki were known and respected internationally. But when the Second World War began on September 1st, 1939, the city's fate changed forever. After the Soviet invasion later that month, Lwów was occupied by Soviet forces. Its universities were nationalized, renamed. Polish professors were forced to abandon their native language and teach in Russian instead. Some were dismissed, others arrested, yet many remained, quietly continuing their work, believing that survival, both personal and cultural, was still possible, still necessary, for themselves, for their students, for the future. When the Germans entered Lwów on June 30th, 1941, many in the city greeted them with cautious relief. Perhaps, they thought, the terror of the NKVD, the Soviet secret police, was finally over. Perhaps the suppression would end. What came instead was something far more methodical, far more brutal: the Nazi occupation. The German command did not view Poland as a nation to govern. They saw it as a land to be conquered, exploited, erased. In their eyes, the Polish educated elite, professors, clergy, lawyers, doctors, were the roots from which resistance could grow. Not just during the war, but long after it ended. The solution, in their twisted logic, was simple: kill the intellectuals, kill the nation. The massacre of the professors of Lwów was not an act of battlefield rage. It was a calculated decision, part of a broader Nazi plan to annihilate Polish leadership. In the first days after the German takeover, a list began to circulate. It had been compiled, it seems, by Ukrainian nationalists and informers. Some of them former students of the very university these men taught at. The list was handed over to the Gestapo. On it were the names of dozens of professors, men of science, literature, medicine, all prominent Poles. The order to act came from SS officer Karl Eberhard Schöngarth, a jurist by training and a devoted Nazi. Under his direction, the Gestapo and members of the Einsatzgruppe, a Nazi killing unit, began preparing their assault. The night of July 3, 1941. German cars moved through the darkened streets of Lwów. Doors were pounded, frightened families dragged from their homes. Officers, some in Gestapo uniforms, others in those of the Wehrmacht, entered apartments with prepared lists in hand. Professors and their families were taken, among them Antoni Cieszyński, a pioneer of modern dentistry, Włodzimierz Stożek, a mathematician and dean of the Polytechnic, Tadeusz Ostrowski, a surgeon and medical scholar, and Tadeusz Boy-Żeleński, a writer, translator, and one of the leading figures of Polish interwar literature. The arrested were brought to the Bursa Abrahamowiczów, a student dormitory that had been transformed into a temporary holding site by the Gestapo. Inside, they were beaten, interrogated, humiliated. Witnesses later described screams that echoed through the corridors throughout the night. The next morning, trucks arrived. Before they left, some prisoners were taken to the courtyard of the former dormitory and shot there. Others were driven to the Wólka Hills outside the city, today part of Lviv. It was early morning when the executions began. The professors were lined up in small groups, facing open pits. They were shot, some by rifle, some by pistol. Those not immediately killed were finished off with bayonets or blows from hammers and rifle butts. Along with the 25 professors, approximately 25 other people were murdered as well. Wives, sons, servants. The final two victims, Professors Henryk Korowicz and Stanisław Ruziewicz, were executed on July 12, 1941, bringing the total number of professors killed to 27. When the massacre ended, dozens of the city's most brilliant minds lay dead. Their bodies were buried hastily. But later, after the German defeat at Stalingrad in 1943, the Nazis decided to conceal their crimes. They formed a special unit, Sonderkommando 1005, which dug up mass graves and burned the bodies of the murdered. What happened to the ashes of the murdered professors and their loved ones is unknown to this day. The killings were meant as a warning, a symbol. Intellectual authority would not be tolerated under Nazi rule. The universities of Lwów, like most educational institutions in former Polish territory, were emptied. Their classrooms fell silent. Many remaining Polish academics fled or went into hiding. Behind the massacre stood Schöngarth and his subordinates, men whose names would later surface again in the grim history of the war. Gestapo officers Walter Kutschmann, Felix Landau, Hans Krueger, and Kurt Stawicki. All were involved, and all would continue murdering civilians throughout Eastern Europe. Some of them even recorded their crimes, writing diaries, mentioning mass murder as a normal part of their jobs. It is this evidence, their own words, that would later bring them to justice. Karl Eberhard Schöngarth, the SS Brigadeführer who personally ordered the killings, went on to participate in the machinery of genocide. He attended the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, the meeting where the final solution was formalized. After the war, he was captured by British forces and brought before a military court. Ironically, he was not tried for the mass murder of thousands. Instead, he was convicted for the execution of a single captured Allied airman. But the conviction was enough. On May 16, 1946, Schöngarth was hanged at Hameln prison in Germany. His execution was justice, not just for that airman, but for the thousands of lives he had taken during the war. Hans Krueger, one of the leading figures in the terror apparatus in eastern Galicia and one of the murderers of the Lwów professors, was eventually brought to trial in West Germany in the 1960s. His central role in mass shootings and deportations was laid bare during the proceedings. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. He spent the remainder of his life behind bars, dying in prison. Felix Landau, whose own diary chillingly recorded daily acts of murder, was also forced to answer for his crimes. After years of living freely in Austria, his past caught up with him in the 1960s. He was tried in 1968, convicted, sentenced to life imprisonment. He was released after 18 years and died 2 years later, in 1988. Walter Kutschmann, another Gestapo officer involved in the massacre, managed to evade justice for decades. He fled to Argentina and lived there under a false identity. He was finally arrested in Buenos Aires in 1985, but he died of a heart attack in a hospital the following year, before he could be extradited to West Germany. In a bizarre postscript, his wife was later reported to authorities for animal abuse, specifically for euthanizing homeless dogs in gas chambers. For years, the story of the murdered scholars remained buried. After the war, Lwów became part of the Soviet Union. Poles were expelled, and any memory of German crimes against them was suppressed. Only after the Soviet Union collapsed did the truth begin to re-emerge. Polish and Ukrainian historians worked together to reconstruct the victims' final hours, and in 2011, a monument was unveiled in Lvov. It stands quietly in the city they once served, engraved with their names, preserving the memory of brilliance stolen by violence. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to History Saga channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss another episode as we continue to uncover the hidden and often heartbreaking stories of our past. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.